value sustainability and asking if investor expectations are aligned with brand strategy. So joining me, we have Tessie Petian, Head of ESG Engagement with Amazon. And we have Drew Hambley, who is Executive Director for Global Stewardship with Morgan Stanley. So welcome to you both. Let's get straight into, first of all, reminding everybody, we do have some polls for this session. So please, at any point over the time of the session, please do vote on the polls on the conference platform. And please use, as ever, the chat box to put your questions and points, and I'll be putting them to our two panelists a little later on. Okay, Drew, perhaps I can turn to you first. Can you reflect for us a little on the trends that you're seeing in the investor community, both generally and specifically in the apparel sector? And to what extent is sustainability now being valued, do you think? Drew?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. So we definitely see the trends in inflows to products in our universe that we label ESG or sustainable. It's one of the fastest growing categories in financial products. So there's a lot of attention that our community is looking at in terms of ES and G. G is something we've been doing for a much longer time, ENS more recently. And so one of the common themes that keeps coming up is this idea of sustainability in the supply chain. And our own internal research group had done this, a survey the other day, earlier this year, that said 70% of investors think there should be some frameworks that are available for managing supply chain risk. So 70%, and then 36% of that group said it should apply to all companies with maybe a lighter touch on SMEs or smaller companies, but certainly at larger entities, a stricter framework to follow supply chain management and risks in that supply chain.
Fine. So just give us an idea. What sort of size of company we're talking about here? You refer to bigger and smaller. Was there a sort of cutoff point for these in particular?
Yeah, so just to give you an idea, so in France and Germany, for example, they have some legislation around this, and I wrote this down. France, it's 5,000 headcount local, 10,000 global, and Germany's looking to put something in place over the next year or two where it would apply to companies with at least 3,000 or more employees. And so I think that's I don't know how small down that gets if you got 25 or 50 employees, but certainly if you're in the thousands of headcount, some of this legislation that's coming through in those countries, and then the EU is looking for some legislation toward the end of this quarter, second quarter, around supply chain due diligence. And so I think, once again, they'll haggle a little bit over the size of the company, but I think safely, if you have a head count of 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, you'd be in scope.
Sure. I guess, as ever, definitions just vary slightly in wherever you are talking about. Okay, so what's the sort of pace then that you're seeing in terms of this ESG focus becoming mainstream?
Yeah, so if you look at the U.S. and EuroSIF, which tracks some of this, we're into to 20, 30 plus $trillion of investable assets that are considering ESG, and this is beyond just supply chain issues, which we're talking about here. You have north of 2,000 signatories to the UNPRI. We're talking 50, 60 $trillion of assets that have agreed to that framework, for example. So, and if you went back, 10, 15 years, we'd be talking a fraction of this. And on the SIF, the Sustainable Investment Forum that's been tracking this, it's gone up in terms of assets, like, 33% a year for the last, 3 or 4 iterations of that report, which they do every 2 years. So I think we're really we've hit critical mass in broad-based investors that are considering ESG as integral to their portfolio solution set.
So you say critical mass. I mean, you generally then get a sense that this is now a momentum it's not going to go backwards. This is really the way that the investment community is going.
Yeah, when I started at this firm 10 years ago, I'd come from another asset manager that was dipping their toe into PRI. And I remember everyone saying, oh, this is a fad, this is a fad. Well, 10 years later, my workload has only gotten more intense and more voluminous. So I don't think there's, going to be any step back here. And it's just always trended upward, over the last decade.
Okay, a 10-year fad, perhaps. What then, let's think about the apparel sector in particular, and what are the kind of changes and shifts in investment within the apparel sector that you're seeing?
Yeah, so we do see, more attention to, and I think it's the negativity associated with mistakes, in this area. So we certainly see what's going on in the China region with some of the forced labor and a lot of attention that's getting. So, inside China, a lot of pressure on European and U.S. Apparel brands, Nike, Adidas, Puma, for example, where, inside mainland China, certainly some blowback for some of the statements they've made. Europe, North America, you're seeing a lot of attention paid to, hey, wait a second, we want these companies to be, paying attention to the supply chain, and, maybe we don't want to buy this brand. Use another, example I saw recently that Simone Biles, who had a big relationship with Nike, decided to go to, I think it was Athleta, and saying, her decision was based on, the values of that company and her feeling more aligned with those values. And so she walked away with, from one of the premier, and I don't know her personally, I don't know, the story that well, but willing to walk away from one of the largest apparel companies in the world to go to somebody a little bit smaller because of a value decision that she made on how she wanted, brand association with her, for example. So, that's one small example, but you've seen that a lot. You've seen a lot with women. Nike had some issues a couple years ago with, not that they're over, but, some of the women not feeling equal partners, with the men in terms of the athletes that were promoting those brands, for example.
Sure. And what about consumer engagement? How much do you see pressure from the investment community in terms of wanting apparel brands to engage with their consumers, and so that their consumers think about ESG type issues when making their choices?
Yeah, the consumer side is been more challenging because if you look at the fast fashion brands, and they're targeting an audience that wants to refresh a little bit, can't maybe afford to spend quite as much, and is maybe less conscious about ESG issues in their purchasing decisions. Where when you get up further on the income scale, there is definitely more attention. So when we're thinking about, if we're thinking about, Moncler and LVMH and some of the higher brands and the customers they're trying to attract, for example, in the apparel space, definitely more attention paid to those customers, and those customers are willing to pay a little bit more to know that, the article they're buying was done with the most sustainability in the product design and in the supply chain, for example. But in the fast fashion, it's probably still a little challenging because that customer, it's not as top of mind as middle income, higher middle income, or upper income customer.
Interesting. I saw some research recently which suggests that when customers are making choices when they're buying something that's at a lower price point, some of these issues actually are higher in mind because they think this is where the problems are going to exist. But when they go to buy a top-end branded item, they assume that these matters have been dealt with, and they assume that there's a built-in focus on ESG type issues. So it's interesting just to see how the kind of consumers engage with the products at different price points. Drew, thanks very much. Sorry, okay.
Just real quick, and I say too, definitely the younger folks, late teens, early 20s, are very vocal on these issues, and not that they don't have jobs and little spending money, but I'm sure mom and dad is still making some of the purchasing decisions, so they're very vocal, in their attention to this, but maybe somebody else is footing the bill a little bit as well.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much, Drew. Audience, please do put your questions and points into the chat box. Looking forward to using them and putting them to our panelists a little bit later. Tessie, thanks very much for your patience. Perhaps you can reflect a little bit and from the perspective of a brand, how much do you sense that the investment community is now expecting a more ESG-focused approach and performance from you? Oh, you're on mute.
Am I unmuted now?
Yeah, you are.
Yeah? Okay, great. Sorry, happens at least twice a day. So as Drew said, I think that for a long time, investors have been focused on the supply chain and have wanted to understand how brands are investing to make sure that you are being transparent about where you're supplying, that you have an audit process that makes sense. But I think that now, as issues have become even more complex, what investors really would like to know is how you're engaging with other stakeholders, because I think some of the issues that we see in supply chain cannot be solved by single brands alone. And so that's why I think we're not the only ones that are working to collaborate with other apparel partners. So I think you have many brands that are working with Better Cotton Initiative or Textile Exchange or Sustainable Apparel Coalition or Leather Working Group, because I think there's a recognition that brands have to work together to collaborate to work through some supply chain issues. So I think that's been a long-standing focus. I think to the latter part of his comments, it's that I think what's newer is that I think investors are starting to try to see if there's data to match up with some of that generational preference that we're seeing. So if we've seen a ton of consumer data that suggests that younger consumers care more about these issues. And I think what people want to know now is, well, are they willing to pay for it? Are we seeing a differential there? And for us, well, one of the interesting things we've done in this space is that last year we launched our Climate Pledge Friendly products, which for us was a way to essentially to help customers discover and shop for more sustainable products. When we initially did the launch, it was in the U.S. Now it's in the U.S. and Europe. And now there are about 75,000 products on our platform. And it's kind of twofold, right? So, well, three. So if we're thinking about investors in mind, I think investors will be really interested to see whether efforts to bring sustainable products to consumers, how that plays out. I think from our perspective, it's a way to encourage our partners to produce more sustainable products. And I think, in general, it's a way to reflect that the customer preferences that we're seeing, that customers want to shop for products that help preserve the natural world. So that's
sure.
kind of what we're seeing from investors now.
So you're seeing the pressures from investors are saying to you, look, you need to be providing these products, you need to be encouraging your customers to take them. And at the same time, you are finding, on the other hand, customers are more engaged in these issues. It's kind of a bit of a kind of a rolling process, then everybody's pushing in the same direction then.
Yeah, I think and I guess, well, that's one of the things that we'll wait for the data to see, right? So for us, our launch is only 6 months old at this point, and and there are lots of different strategies within that. So, right, so a lot of the work of Climate Pledge Friendly products builds upon certifications that I know this audience knows really well, right? So, like Global Organic Textile Standard or Blue Sign or Blue Angel, and I think that's one. And then another thread is trying to think through, well, can we lower waste by improving manufacturing processes and using more sustainable raw materials? Can we actually redesign some of the shopping experiences? So, drops have been really, really popular in this world, but can we make the drops made to order rather than having to produce a lot and see if we can find buyers for them? So can we actually shift that kind of experience? I think there's for us, obviously, we like to experiment. And so I think we're trying to experiment with many different threads to figure out how you can create a more sustainable process here.
Okay. Can you give us a bit of an insight into how you're using the changing relationship with investors and perhaps with the consumers too, to align your strategy more holistically around your product development, for example?
Yeah, I think for us, I think the bigger thing is to try to communicate that. So one of the things I think I've tried to, so I joined actually Amazon only just a year ago from the investment world. And I think one of the things I've tried to do is to bring that investor perspective throughout the company in my conversations with the product teams to try to use the data produced by houses like Morgan Stanley to help them to add to the consumer data that we have on these are the preferences. This is how things are changing. So how are we reflecting this in our product design process and the supply chain process? And I mean, that is part of my job, to kind of take that information and help Amazon incorporate that into its process.
Sure. And, you know, in terms of then taking this forward to engaging with your customers, is this, you know, is this the narrative that you use to engage with them? Is it a narrative that you use in your marketing in terms of, well, look at how well these products are sourced. This is why you want to be using them. I mean, is that the kind of narrative that you use?
I think in some cases, right? If you think, let's take a I think a very clear one that you can see highlighted in our climate pledge friendly. It's not the easiest name, climate pledge friendly products. We'll work on that branding, but I think so. If I think about one really obvious one, so a lot of First Bees Baby, right? That's an audience we know that's already engaged on sort of the sustainable on the sustainability of the material, right? We see more demand for organics in that market. We see that is something that the consumer responds to really well, and it's also something that we've seen that there is demand for an increasing selection of apparel products from brands like that. So whether it's First Bees Babies, whether it's Honest Baby, and so that using that information, it helps us add more certifications, and it encourages more manufacturers and brands to launch more certified apparel over time. So that's actually what you see the feedback loop quite clearly. You see it from the customer base, you see it from and so then it helps for manufacturers. And then I think, and Drew can agree or disagree with me, that that's the kind of info that investors are looking for, to see where there's pickup, where we see that where we see that.
Drew, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, and I think one of the things, you know, I agree with what Tessie said. One of the things we're always asking companies too is, it's great to have certifications, and you can't do this all yourself, but it's also important that somebody paid by your organization has some, I'll call it boots on the ground. I hate that term, but it gets the point across. Because if you just outsource the entire certification process, it's easy to just say, oh, we did our due diligence, but nothing beats somebody who's drawing a paycheck from the company in question actually being part of that due diligence. And so we think that strengthens the approach when companies take that extra step.
Sure. It's a bit like when you... Sorry, yeah, Tess, you go.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think that one of the things that's probably notable when we launched this is that there were a number of certifications missing. Because we undertook, we basically partnered with a wide range of government agencies, nonprofits, and independent labs to help us make that, to distinguish what we thought were more sustainable products and which certifications we decided to align with. We also launched our own certification because, yeah, I would agree that the idea is not just that, I mean, yes, I think everyone will agree that not in the apparel space, that fair trade is fine, but there are a lot of certifications coming to the market, and it's simply not enough to just say, yep, okay, all of those are great, and we've walked away. Sorry, Ian, continue.
No, I was going to make the point that it's in the same way that you can't offset your way to climate neutrality, you can't audit or certify your way to sustainability. I think that's very clear. Okay, let's thank you for the questions that are coming in. Let me go to one from Paula Rogers. And it's a question about how we can best understand the investors that have largest holdings in particular brands and the ESG issues they are measuring. So, Drew, how would somebody go and find out who's investing where and the sort of, you know, how rigorous they're being on these ESG issues?
Yeah, so sort of two questions. So how do you know who's invested in what? Well, every financial firm that has holdings has to produce a document called a 13F. You can get this, for example, on the SEC website. So if you look up Morgan Stanley or JP Morgan or any of us, you can look under the SEC filings and look for the 13F document. We have to file it every quarter, and that lists every holding that we hold on behalf of our clients. So that's how you can find out who owns what. There are obviously, you know, Bloomberg and FactSet and some others sort of gather that data. So if you have access to that, they aggregate some of that 13F data. And then what most of us do is you can go directly to our websites, and we all have sustainability portions of our websites where we try to talk about like which products we're promoting as sustainable products, what kind of, you know, biannual or annual summaries of engagement and proxy voting that we do. And so most of that stuff we have to put up on our website so you can, see the actions we're taking, how we engage with companies. And so we get this a lot, and we get, oh, we think you're a big shareholder in Acme Corp. And we go and look and say, well, we used to be, but maybe we sold that position. But, we'll try to work with people and say, yeah, this time we are big here, and, happy to talk about what we've done at that particular company.
It's of interest then, when you mention your products, you list them as particularly sustainable. How do you refer to the other ones? These are ones over here where it's all oil, gas, and everything else. If you list things that are sustainable, you mean what about everything else?
Yeah, so what we try to do is, listen, it's still early in this process, but, products where we're thinking about this all the way through the value chain and we're gathering data. And then, listen, we still have some clients that aren't there yet either, Ian. So we don't want to just say, gee, we're not going to buy oil and gas companies, because we might have a client that says, hey, buy oil and gas companies for us, right? And so, we have to be mindful of what our clients are asking for. So we're offering products and solutions that clients that want this front and center as part of their solution set. And then we still have some clients that aren't there yet, so we offer products that have always been around. I think over time, Ian, those clients are getting smaller and smaller and moving into the other bucket. But in the meantime, we have to manage the way clients ask us to manage their money.
Sure. And I guess it's being realistic. You can't move everybody right the way across immediately. It's a kind of question of saying, well, look,
right,
moving things as a gradual process. Okay. Paul had a follow-up question, and it was around creating better balance in the voice of economically less powerful stakeholders, for example, workers, and economically powerful stakeholders, investors. Tessie, I wonder if you want to answer that first. Drew, I'll come back to you as well. Tessie, getting the balance right when you're listening to the different stakeholder voices.
Well, I think that's, getting the balance right is really, can be, trying to figure out the word to say it. I think it's clear who the primary stakeholder is in each part of the process, right? So that ultimately a lot of, and this actually is the way that investor materiality works, right? Investors should generally be asking for things that are in alignment with what employees are asking for or what the supply chain is asking for. I think that maybe in the very early days of ESG, because I also have been around for a long time in the ESG world, you sometimes had investors asking for things that were counter other stakeholders. But I think right now, most investors are trying to have a holistic view and sort of trying to balance with their requests and their asks, the needs and desires of employees as a stakeholder, local communities as a stakeholder. And so that when a request on supply chain, ultimately, some of the supply chain questions might, in a materiality sense, be quite small relative to the materiality of a company, but it is asked with the community or with the employee or the supply chain stakeholder in mind. So I think that they're not really as in conflict as I think that question may presume.
Okay, thank you. Drew, I guess, is this part of the, have you said, the transition from into a kind of a more ESG focused space for the investment community? Is the recognition of the strength of your position and the ability to impact other stakeholders who are involved?
Yeah, and Ian, just to use a small example, like living wage, minimum wage. A couple of years ago, you say, hey, gee, they're getting the lowest cost workers. That's great for shareholders. But then you find on the flip side that the customer satisfaction scores of that company are pretty low. And then when you raise the wages, those employees feel more empowered, the customer scores go up, and you actually do better in the long run. So as a long-term investor, we were probably short-sighted a couple of years ago thinking, gee, if we can just get people at the minimum wage, that's really going to be a boon for the bottom line. But what you found out is actually when you empowered employees more, you actually did better. The company did better, and we as shareholders did better. So I think that thinking is starting to change. That's just one example of, the short-term versus long-term thinking. And when you think in the long term, if you're not listening to your employees, if you're not empowering your employees, they're not going to go the extra mile to empower the customer. And in the short term, that might seem like the right idea, but over the long term, it's not.
Great. Thank you very much indeed.
Can I give you one
Sure.
very concrete piggyback off of that? So when Amazon raised its minimum wage to $15 in 2018, you did not see a negative reaction from the market. When a very large company that I think many people know of first said they were increasing wages in around 2014, 2015, the market had a negative reaction. And it's exactly that. I think there's been an evolution in what investors see as helpful to the long-term health of the company. So only been positive reactions to minimum wage.
Yeah, Tessie, if we're thinking of the same company, and I think we are, that company's customer satisfaction scores doubled. And so the market's reaction in 2014, 2015 was sour because we thought, oh my God, our SG&A is going to go up. But what ended up happening is more customers started going back to those locations because they had a better experience and the top line grew more than the SG&A. And we learned a lesson.
Interesting. Quick question for you, Tessie. I'm conscious of time. I've got a lot of questions coming in. Certification, a lot of certifications on the market. How do you select the ones you engage with, and what's the kind of criteria and process you go through?
So when we launched, well, before the launch, I should say, we worked with Anthesis, who's been had 25 years supporting brands on sustainability. And what we had them conduct an independent review and assessment of all the standards and certifications we were thinking about for inclusion in the Climate Pledge friendly products. And that was sort of how we started. We said, here are all of the things that we've put together from our reviews with experts, with NGOs that have all put here. And you go do this review and figure out whether this actually is additive to our sustainability goals. That's how we did it.
Okay, thank you. Drew, quick question for you. I guess an unintended consequence of really stepping up your requirements around the investment companies is you got to ensure that your own house is in order. So our question asks, what have been the challenges around ensuring that you're doing everything right internally as an investment business? Is this something you recognise as a sort of, there's challenges there as well?
Yeah, so, listen, we have a whole team that sits at headquarters that thinks about these same issues, Ian. So, Morgan Stanley, we've been talking on the investment side about circular economy and plastic waste. And then the firm made a commitment to helping reduce plastic waste. We've been talking a lot about diversity and inclusion. Sorry, it's a little tongue-tied there. Diversity and inclusion, and asking companies to produce some more data on that. And then our own company came out with a report. So there's a little bit, sometimes we're a little bit ahead of where the company's at. Sometimes actually the company's a little ahead of where we're at. But we do liaise with the internal groups to say, here are the things that we're talking to our investee companies about, and then they sort of take that back and try to figure out how our company can be best in class. So there'll always be a little, we might be a little ahead, they might be a little ahead, but over time we try to get some alignment.
Fine. Final question I'm conscious of time. Final question to both of you, and it's a question from Kate Larson. What's the top sustainability step, not a target, but action and impact delivered, would you, Morgan Stanley, like to see of an apparel company? And I'll ask the same question to you, Tessie. What's the top step you want to be able to do? Drew, to you, what's the top sustainability step you want to see as an investor of an apparel company?
Yeah, so as an investor, we vote on directors, and we want to make sure that our boards are acutely aware of this issue and that they're pressing the management that they oversee to make sure these things are handled. Because at the end of the day, the board is our shareholder representative is the board. We want to make sure the board is educated and pressing management to do a good job in this area.
Great, thank you. And Tessie, for you, what's the sort of, what would be this top sustainability step for you that you'd like to do?
I think that what we've done and what we continue, sorry, I think you can hear that chime. I think that one of the things that we're continually trying to do is incorporate sustainability into the design process, into the manufacturing process, and then also into for us, obviously, we have a massive logistics operation. So I think for us, it's to make sure that each step is designed with sustainability in mind, right? So we have overall really large goals like having 50% of our shipments be net zero carbon by 2030. And in order to get to a goal like that, you have to incorporate sustainability into each part of the process. But that's not one answer. I totally cheated, but I feel like at the scale of what we're asking, this has to be incorporated at each step.
Sure. No, thank you very much indeed. I was asked earlier on the chat about the reference some research a little bit earlier. That's actually research as part of the Sustainable Apparel Barometer that I referenced right at the top of the event earlier on today. So if you want to hear more about that, you're partnering with Ipsos in some research for that. So Ipsos are appearing in a couple of sessions over the rest of the event. So I would recommend you go to those sessions if you want to learn a little bit more about that research. We've come to the end of this session. We do have speed networking coming up in 10 minutes. They'll be there. I'm looking forward to meeting many of you in the speed networking session. They're a lot of fun. We have one-on-one meetings for 5 minutes, chance to establish contact with people, trying to recreate the kind of casual encounters that you have at conferences. It's not exactly the same, we know, but it's still worth doing for sure if you're interested. That's in 10 minutes' time on the conference platform. But for now, thanks to Drew and thanks to Tessie. It's been a fascinating discussion. We could have gone on for an awful lot longer, but I really appreciate your insight and your candor, and it's been a fascinating discussion for sure. So thanks to you both, and thanks to everybody, and see you at the Speed Networking very shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you.